You know that friend who always brags about their legendary Pokemon team? Well, they're probably using fake legendaries. Today, we're ranking the 7 levels of pseudo-legendary Pokemon, and here's the twist. The hardest ones to obtain and master are also the most dominant in competitive play. These aren't actual legendaries, but the correlation between grinding effort and tournament success is no accident. From brutal evolution levels to catch rates that make you question your sanity, the pseudos that demand the most investment deliver the biggest payoff. By the end of this video, you'll understand why one pseudo can dominate tournaments while another gets benched faster than a level 5 Magikarp. We start at the bottom of the effort ladder, where even completing the basic 3-stage evolution feels like an achievement. The Participation Trophy. Level 1 is Goodra, the pseudo-legendary that makes you wonder if Game Freak accidentally lowered the standards. Everyone called Gumi the weakest dragon type ever, and honestly, looking at this slimy blob, you can see why. The Pokédex literally describes it as the weakest dragon-type Pokémon, which is not exactly the resume you want for a future powerhouse. But here's where things get weird. Goodra actually becomes a special defensive wall with 150 special defense, turning this gooey mess into something that can tank special attacks all day long. The problem is, getting there requires rain or fog just to evolve from Sliggoo, because apparently this dragon needs perfect weather conditions to reach its final form. It's like needing a specific atmospheric pressure to unlock your potential. The gooey ability slows down any physical attacker that makes contact, which sounds useful until you realize most threats are hitting you with special moves anyway. But when a physical attacker does touch this thing, they get stuck like they walked into a spider web. You can almost hear them saying, "Why is this dragon so sticky?" as their speed drops. Sap Sipper gives Goodra an attack boost when hit by grass moves, which is honestly hilarious since Goodra barely uses physical attacks with its mediocre 100 base attack. You get an offensive boost for a stat you're probably not even using. It's like getting a discount on something you never planned to buy. Hisuian Goodra gets a steel shell upgrade that pushes its defensive capabilities into an entirely different league. This regional form drops from 90 horsepower to 80 horsepower and slows from 80 speed down to 60 speed, but boosts its defense from the original's pathetic 70 all the way up to a respectable 100 base defense, making it actually capable of taking physical hits. The mucus reacts with water to form metallic armor, which sounds way cooler than it probably looks. The real joke is that this soft defensive blob can still punch back with 110 special attack when you need it to. Goodra isn't completely helpless on offense, but you're basically using a shield that occasionally shoots back instead of a proper weapon. But let's be honest here. The effort to get Goodra working feels like getting a participation trophy for completing the 3-stage evolution requirement. You did the work, you hit the BST 600 threshold, but you're not exactly dominating battles. It's the only single-type pseudo-legendary, which means it lacks the type combination advantages that make other pseudos actually threatening. Both forms share the lowest base attack stat among all pseudo-legendary Pokemon at just 100, cementing their position at the bottom of the power chain. Goodra proves that not all BST 600 pseudos are created equal. Some are built for offense, some for speed, and some are just built to survive whatever gets thrown at them. This defensive dragon sets the baseline for what actual effort looks like in the pseudo-legendary world. But what happens when a pseudo-legendary actually becomes accessible to regular players instead of just endgame grinders? The People's Champion. Level 2 is Garchomp, the pseudo-legendary that broke every rule about accessibility and made other dragons look like participation prizes. Most pseudos make you wait until the endgame to catch their first evolution, grinding through Victory Road or some post-game area like you're earning a PhD in patience. But Diamond and Pearl let you catch Gible in Wayward Cave during the middle of your adventure, which was like finding a bazooka in the sporting goods section. This mid-game availability created the first pseudo that felt like it belonged to regular players instead of just elite trainers showing off their rare collections. You could actually use Garchomp during your main playthrough instead of just admiring it from afar. Getting to Wayward Cave's hidden basement required your bicycle and strength to navigate the bike ramps and underground maze to access the B1F area where Gible actually lived. These unusual entry methods still counted as significant effort, but once you found that B1F area, you had access to a future champion-level threat. The Dragon/Ground typing combination laughs at electric types with complete immunity while maintaining serious offensive presence. That 102 base speed hits a sweet spot where Garchomp outspeeds most threats without feeling like it's trying too hard. The typing also gives solid offensive coverage, letting Garchomp pressure a wide range of Pokemon types effectively. Then Cynthia showed up with her Garchomp and traumatized an entire generation of players who thought they understood what power looked like. Her champion-level Garchomp served as this brutal reality check that turned casual victories into desperate survival battles. You'd walk into that fight thinking your team was ready, then watch this land shark tear through your roster like they were made of paper. The competitive scene embraced Garchomp as the perfect utility knife that could fit on almost any team. It works as a hazard setter with Stealth Rock, a wall breaker with its strong offensive stats, or a speed control option that pressures faster threats. Garchomp's versatility meant you could plug it into different team roles without rebuilding your entire strategy around it. Here's where things get weird though. Mega Garchomp somehow manages to be worse than the base form in most competitive situations. The Mega Evolution boosts its attack from 130 to a massive 170, but that speed drop from 102 to 92 turns a perfect sweeper into a bulkier but slower threat. You're trading the ability to outspeed key matchups for 40 extra points of attack you might never get to use. That speed reduction causes Mega Garchomp to lose critical battles against faster threats that the base form could handle easily. It's like upgrading your sports car's engine but filling the trunk with concrete. You're technically stronger but practically weaker where it matters most. Garchomp's moderate effort requirement paired with incredible competitive payoff made it the pseudo for the people. You didn't need to grind to level 64 or hunt down some legendary encounter rate. You just needed to explore thoroughly and commit to training something worthwhile. But this accessibility was just the beginning. The real dedication test starts when you encounter pseudos that demand serious patience before they reveal their true power. The grind begins. Level 3 is where Salamence and Dragonite show you what old-school pseudo-legendary dedication actually looks like. These represent the classic grinded-out approach where massive payoff comes only after massive patience, and you feel every single level of that investment. Bagon literally bashes its head against cliffs dreaming of flight, which perfectly captures what you're doing as a player grinding these evolution lines. The Pokédex describes how Bagon repeatedly leaps from high cliffs trying to master flight, only to crash back down and smash its head against rocks out of pure frustration. This head-bashing behavior hardens its skull to the durability of tempered steel over time. But more importantly, it mirrors your own experience of throwing this tiny dragon at battles until something finally clicks. Salamence doesn't evolve until level 50, which means you're committing serious time before seeing any real payoff. But when Mega Salamence enters its rage mode, you understand why it gets banned from most competitive formats. The Mega Evolution puts such severe stress on its wings that they merge into a crescent shape, and this painful process can induce a wild state that makes it ridiculously overpowered. The wings become more aerodynamic as Salamence tucks its arms into its shell, reaching flight speeds that break the game's balance. The journey from Bagon to Shelgon to Salamence mirrors your own evolution from hopeful trainer to competitive threat. You start with this stubborn little dragon that can barely do anything useful, progress through Shelgon's defensive cocoon phase where you're just waiting for something to happen, then finally unlock this aerial powerhouse that dominates battles. Dragonite carries Lance's legacy as the hyper beam spammer that defined late-game boss battles for an entire generation. This was many players' first encounter with a dragon type before reaching the Elite Four, and its typing made it nearly impossible to counter effectively. With a 4x weakness to ice and additional weaknesses to rock, dragon, and fairy moves from Generation 6 onward, Dragonite still resisted most other attacks and served as this brutal reality check that separated prepared trainers from everyone else. Multiscale makes Dragonite nearly unkillable at full HP by reducing damage from any attack by half when it's at maximum health. This ability turns Dragonite into a setup sweeper that can survive almost any opening attack, giving it the opportunity to boost its stats or unleash devastating counterattacks without immediate fear of getting knocked out. Both evolution lines require such late-stage commitment that you really feel the investment when they finally reach their final forms. Dratini was so rare in early generations that players initially mistook it for a mythical Pokémon, and you couldn't catch it until you figured out the Safari Zone fishing mechanics. Even then, this physically weak, slow, and frail little dragon stays largely useless through Dratini at level 30, and doesn't become the powerhouse Dragonite until level 55, often just in time for the Elite Four battles. The time commitment at this level starts separating casual players from dedicated grinders. You need genuine patience to train these dragons through their largely useless early stages. But the competitive dominance you unlock makes every hour of grinding worthwhile. But what happens when the challenge shifts from pure grinding to mastering specialized mechanics? The Specialty Shop. Level 4 is where Kommo-o and Baxcalibur prove that sometimes Pseudo-Legendary means completely unique rather than generically powerful. These two represent the gimmick approach to BST 600, where you're getting specialized tools that excel in specific situations instead of well-rounded powerhouses that work everywhere. Kommo-o packs 3 different defensive abilities depending on what you need. Bulletproof grants immunity to Ball and Bomb, moves like Shadow Ball and Sludge Bomb. Soundproof blocks all sound-based attacks, including Boom Burst and Hyper Voice, and Overcoat protects against Powder and Spore, moves like Sleep Powder and Spore. You're basically getting a Swiss Army knife of immunities that can shut down entire movesets if you predict correctly. The problem is you need to know what's coming before you can counter it effectively. The signature Z move, Clangorous Soul Blaze, turns Kommo-o into a late-game setup sweeper that boosts all its stats while dealing Dragon-type damage to everything on the field. When this move connects, Kommo-o gains 1 stage in attack defense, special attack, special defense, and speed simultaneously. You're essentially getting 6 moves worth of setup in a single turn, but you need to survive long enough to use the Z move and then capitalize on those boosts. The Totem Kommo-o trial in Ultra Sun and Moon became infamous for combining these stat boosts with additional totem bonuses that made it nearly impossible to take down. Players walked into that trial expecting a normal battle and got steamrolled by a dragon fighting type that kept getting stronger while ignoring half their moveset. You needed specific counters and careful planning just to survive the encounter. Baxcalibur brings this Kaiju Excalibur aesthetic with abilities that completely flip normal type interactions. Thermal Exchange boosts Baxcalibur's attack when hit by fire-type moves while preventing burns, which means fire types actually make this ice dragon stronger instead of weaker. You can watch opponents realize they're helping you set up as their fire attacks backfire spectacularly. Glaive Rush creates this fascinating risk-reward dynamic where you deal massive dragon-type damage but guarantee the opponent's next attack will hit for double damage. You're trading immediate offensive pressure for certain retaliation, which means you need to calculate whether you can survive the counter or knock out the threat entirely. One wrong prediction, and you're taking twice the damage you bargained for. The Dragon/Ice typing gives Baxcalibur resistances to water, grass, and electric attacks while maintaining ice resistance as an Ice-type Pokémon, thus avoiding the universal ice weakness that plagues most Dragon-type Pseudos. However, this typing comes with 5 weaknesses: Fighting, Rock, Steel, Dragon, and Fairy, creating a complex defensive profile that requires careful team support. You're getting defensive utility that breaks the normal Pseudo-Legendary weakness patterns, but you need to play around more offensive threats than most Pseudos face. Both require specific team support and matchup knowledge to reach their potential, unlike straightforward Pseudos that work in any situation. The learning curve jumps significantly here because you need to understand their gimmicks to make them work properly. These specialty Pseudos represent a different kind of challenge entirely. The dedication required goes beyond grinding levels into mastering complex mechanics and strategic planning. But some Pseudos take this concept even further into truly intimidating territory: the Nightmare Fuel. Level 5 is where Tyranitar and Hydreigon earned their reputations as the Pseudos that make opponents question their life choices. These represent the unholy terror approach to pseudo-legendary design, where raw intimidation factor becomes the primary selling point instead of utility or accessibility. Tyranitar's evolution from Larvitar to Pupitar to Kaiju mirrors. Godzilla's progression from small threat to city destroyer. You start with this tiny armored larva that looks harmless enough, then watch it cocoon itself into Pupitar's shell form, before finally emerging as this massive rock monster that can cause earthquakes capable of toppling mountains. The Pokédex describes how Tyranitar's raw strength can bury rivers and redraw landscapes, which sounds less like a Pokémon description and more like a natural disaster report. The Rock/Dark typing breaks the Dragon-type pattern that dominates most pseudo-legendaries, giving Tyranitar a completely different offensive presence. Sandstream Weather Control automatically summons sandstorms that damage non-rock, ground, or steel types, while significantly boosting Tyranitar's own special defense. You're getting team support capabilities and personal defensive buffs simultaneously, turning this kaiju into a weather setter that can still deliver crushing offensive pressure. In its debut generation, Larvitar couldn't be acquired until Mount Silver, meaning Tyranitar was effectively unusable until after defeating both the Johto and Kanto Elite Four. You needed to complete 2 entire regions before even starting the evolution line, making it a true post-game investment that only the most dedicated players would ever see in action. Hydreigon forces the most brutal evolution grind in the franchise, making other late bloomers look reasonable by comparison. Dano doesn't evolve until level 50, then Zweilous waits until level 64 to finally become Hydreigon. You're looking at one of the longest grinds in Pokémon history, where most players won't see the final form until after beating the Elite Four and completing the main story. The 3 heads fighting each other creates this Yamada no Orochi mythological vibe that matches its destructive potential perfectly. The design draws from Japanese mythology's multi-headed serpent, with the wings and arm-like appendages representing additional heads from the original myth. Even the evolution level references kaiju movies, with level 64 matching the release year of the Godzilla film, featuring the 3-headed monster. Ghetsis' terrifying Hydreigon became a legitimate nightmare for players due to its overwhelming power. This particular encounter served as a brutal reality check that separated prepared trainers from everyone else, with many players getting completely steamrolled by a Dragon Dark type that seemed to ignore normal damage calculations. Both lines require serious late-game commitment that goes beyond normal patience requirements. Hydreigon represents one of the longest evolution grinds in the entire franchise, demanding exceptional dedication just to see the final form. You're investing dozens of hours into Pokémon that remain largely useless until their final evolution unlocks their true potential. These unholy terrors prove that the most intimidating pseudos demand the most patience and dedication from trainers willing to endure the grind. The time investment reaches levels that separate truly dedicated players from everyone else. But even that dedication only gets you so far without the skills to back it up. The Technical Masters. Level 6 is where Metagross and Dragapult represent the pseudos that separate good players from great players through sheer mechanical complexity. These are the competitive kings that demand both massive time investment and genuine skill to unlock their full potential. Beldum's catch rate of 3 makes obtaining Metagross feel like catching an actual legendary Pokémon. You're looking at the same capture difficulty shared only with mythical and many legendary Pokémon, which means you need to stock up on Ultra Balls and prepare for a long battle just to add this thing to your team. This brutal acquisition rate reinforces the exclusivity and prestige that comes with mastering the Technical Masters tier. Even when Steven Stone gifts you a Beldum after beating the Elite Four, you're getting it too late in the game to be practically useful for your main playthrough. Steven Stone's Metagross became the signature of elite trainers, and its Steel/Psychic typing avoids the ice weakness that plagues most pseudos. You're getting resistances to 9 different types and immunity to poison, creating this defensive profile that laughs at common offensive threats. Unlike dragon types, Metagross has weaknesses to ground and fire rather than ice, giving it a completely different defensive profile. While other dragon-type pseudos get bodied by a single ice beam, Metagross shrugs off the attack and fires back with its own devastating moves. Metagross demands precise positioning and prediction to maximize its tanky offensive presence. That base 130 defense stat, combined with its extensive resistances, means you can switch into attacks that would obliterate other pseudos. But you need to read your opponent correctly to make these plays work. You're essentially piloting a tank that hits like a truck, but only if you position it properly on the battlefield. Dragapult launches its own children as missiles with dragon darts while maintaining the fastest speed among all pseudos. That base 142 speed stat lets it outspeed and threaten almost everything in competitive play, but managing this glass cannon requires careful strategic deployment. You're getting incredible offensive pressure paired with below-average defenses, which means one wrong prediction can end your sweep attempt. The signature move, Dragon Darts, fires Dreepy children as supersonic missiles in a unique two-hit attack that deals massive damage while reflecting the Pokemon's disturbing lore. You're literally watching a parent use its offspring as ammunition, which adds this dark thematic layer to what's essentially a devastating offensive move. Infiltrator and Clear Body give Dragapult the tools to bypass common defensive strategies that shut down other sweepers. Infiltrator lets you ignore, substitute, and screen moves, while Clear Body prevents opponents from lowering your stats. The hidden ability. Cursed Body has a 30% chance to disable any move that hits Dragapult, giving you even more defensive utility despite the frail stat line. Both require deep understanding of competitive mechanics, team synergy, and advanced prediction skills that casual players rarely develop. You need to know speed tiers, damage calculations, and matchup knowledge just to use these Pokemon effectively in serious battles. The effort requirement reaches levels where only dedicated competitive players can unlock their full potential. You're not just grinding levels anymore, but developing genuine strategic skills that separate tournament players from everyone else. But even these technical masters pale in comparison to the absolute peak of pseudo-legendary design, the untouchable elite. Level 7 is where Garchomp and Mega Salamence represent the absolute peak of pseudo-legendary design through perfect combinations of power and precision. These two have transcended the pseudo category to become generational defining threats that reshape how competitive play works entirely. Garchomp's placement here might seem confusing since we covered its accessibility earlier, but that low-effort initial acquisition contrasts sharply with its status as a consistently dominant force in the high-level competitive environment. While catching Gible was relatively easy, mastering Garchomp's role as a competitive powerhouse requires understanding its highly optimized base stats and typing at the deepest level. That 102 base speed hits the perfect sweet spot that allows it to outspeed the vast majority of Pokemon in any metagame while maintaining consistent OU presence across multiple generations. This speed tier places Garchomp in an advantageous position where it can revenge kill faster opponents or reliably set up entry hazards like Stealth Rock before getting threatened. You're getting a Pokemon that functions as both offensive threat and utility support depending on what your team needs. The Dragon/Ground typing, combined with Garchomp's move pool and stat distribution, create a Pokemon that never truly falls out of favor regardless of meta shifts. That valuable resistance to electric-type attacks pairs with strong offensive STAB combinations that remain relevant as new threats emerge. Garchomp adapts to evolving metagames through sheer versatility rather than requiring specific team support or gimmicky strategies. This sustained relevance across multiple generations proves that perfect stat distribution matters more than raw numbers. Mega Salamence takes the opposite approach by being so overwhelmingly powerful that it gets banned to Ubers in most competitive formats. The Aerolate ability transforms normal-type moves into flying-type nukes, while providing STAB boosts that make everything hit like a truck. Converting normal-type moves such as Return into STAB-boosted flying-type attacks created overwhelmingly potent offensive versatility that led directly to its ban from standard competitive formats like OU. This ability to threaten nearly anything in OU created such an oppressive presence that competitive formats couldn't maintain balance with Mega Salamence included. You're getting a Pokemon so dominant that its mere existence warps team building and forces specific counter strategies just to survive encounters. The combination of high offensive stats, speed, and air raid created an unstoppable force that broke normal competitive boundaries. Both represent hundreds of hours of grinding, team building, and competitive experience to truly master at the highest levels. The skill ceiling reaches heights where even experienced players continue discovering new applications and strategies years after their introduction. You need deep understanding of speed tiers, damage calculations, and advanced prediction skills just to use these Pokémon optimally. The effort requirement goes beyond simple time investment into genuine strategic mastery that separates tournament players from casual competitors. You're developing skills that transfer across different Pokémon and formats rather than just learning one specific threat. These untouchable GOATs prove that the pseudo-hierarchy directly correlates effort with competitive dominance. But there's something even deeper at work here that most players never discover: the secret level. There's actually a bonus level that most players never reach: the pseudo-legendary mindset itself. The real final boss isn't any individual Pokémon, but understanding why the BST 600 three-stage formula works so well as a game design philosophy that creates genuine investment and lasting competitive value. Ice Beam embodies most pseudos, except Metagross, Baxcalibur, and Tyranitar, creating this universal check that keeps the entire tier balanced. You can watch Dragon-type pseudos dominate battles until someone brings out a simple Ice-type move, and suddenly these legendary tier threats become sitting ducks. Metagross resists Ice due to its Steel typing, Baxcalibur resists Ice because it is Ice-type, and Tyranitar takes neutral damage as Rock/Dark, confirming these three deviations from the Dragon-type curse. This weakness isn't accidental. It's deliberate design that prevents any single pseudo from becoming completely oppressive in competitive play. The late evolution requirement forces players to commit before seeing the final product, creating genuine investment that makes the payoff feel earned. When Dano doesn't evolve into Svilus until level 50, and then waits until level 64 to become Hydreigon, you're looking at one of the longest purely level-based grinds in the franchise. This time, investment creates emotional attachment that makes finally reaching the final form feel like a genuine achievement rather than just another evolution. Dragon typing serves as both blessing and curse throughout the pseudo-hierarchy. You get incredible offensive presence with strong STAB moves and solid coverage options, but that same typing creates exploitable weaknesses that keep these monsters from being completely broken. The Dragon/Ice weakness pattern runs through most pseudo lines, creating consistent counterplay opportunities that prevent total dominance. Beldum's catch rate of 3 becomes this running joke that highlights how these Pokémon are designed to feel rare and special from the very beginning. You're dealing with the same capture difficulty as actual legendary Pokémon, which makes successfully catching one feel like a genuine accomplishment. Even Steven Stone's gift Beldum comes so late in the game that you can't use it for your main playthrough, reinforcing the post-game exclusive nature of these threats. The bazooka at a water gun fight effect only works when the bazooka requires genuine effort to obtain and master. You can't just hand everyone a Garchomp and expect it to maintain its special status. The grinding, the late evolution levels, and the skill requirements create natural barriers that preserve the exclusivity. When Dano doesn't evolve into Svilus until level 50 and then waits until level 64 to become Hydreigon, you're looking at one of the longest purely level-based grinds in the franchise that demands exceptional dedication. Most players stop at the accessibility level with Pokémon like Garchomp, never pushing through to experience the true competitive monsters that demand hundreds of hours of dedication. The secret level reveals that pseudo-legendary power comes from the intersection of time, skill, and dedication, rather than just high base stats. Raw BST 600 means nothing without the right typing, abilities, move pool, and meta timing to make those numbers matter in actual battles. Understanding this correlation transforms how you approach team building and competitive preparation. The entire hierarchy reflects something deeper about what separates casual players from competitive masters: the final truth. This hierarchy reveals the true design philosophy behind pseudo-legendary Pokémon. The pseudo-legendary hierarchy isn't about the Pokémon, it's about the player willing to put in the work. You can hand someone a Garchomp, but they won't understand why it dominates until they've grinding through the accessibility levels below it. BST 600 means nothing without the right typing, ability, move pool, and meta timing to make those numbers matter in actual battles. Goodra has the same stat total as Garchomp, but one gets benched while the other defines competitive formats. The ladder from Goodra to Mega Salamence mirrors your own journey from casual player to competitive master, where each level demands more dedication than the last. The key is mastery over the meta. Now, let me know in the comments, which pseudo do you think required the most honest-to-God grind to raise? Like and subscribe if you survived Cynthia